keep the conversations.
I hate to say that, but I think in New York, DC, everyone.
We also have support the Shahnameh program. Just Song of the North.
Yeah, for
Puppet.
Hamid Rahman.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's very big on Russia. I think his statues are all Russia only too.
Something like that. So we're ready when. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the behind the scenes for the opening night of Avaz. My name is Shruthi Mukund. I'm the Director of Community Engagement here at Almi Theatre. And the behind the scenes was started to help our audiences learn more about the theme or the motivations of a play beyond the artistry. Because later on, you'll actually get to watch the whole play in this fantastic set. And my special treat is that on the behind the scenes nights, I get to sit on this set, and I think it's really special. But along with me, I have esteemed guests who have actually, Marjan is joining us here from New York, Ali is joining us here from Atlanta, Holly is here based in DC and LA. So thank you so much for joining us. Holly is an Iranian American analyst and commentator on the Middle East, specializing on Iran. She's based in Washington and is a non-resident fellow at the think tank, the Atlantic Council. Holly spent her teenage years in the Islamic Republic of Iran from 1999 to 2006, during which time she graduated from Tehran International School. She's fluent in Persian. She's also the editor of the Council's Iran Source blog and curator of the weekly newsletter, The Iranist. Welcome, Holly. Next, we have Ali Mesghali, is a chef whose love of cooking began while growing up in Esfahan, Iran, and Los Angeles, California. This interest grew to become a passion and a career after Ali moved to Atlanta, Georgia. In the kitchen, as well as the dining room, Ali is known for his pursuit of perfection, his intensity, and love for what he does. This unending aspiration for perfection has been instrumental in establishing the standard for Persian cuisine in Atlanta and also here in DC. So if you haven't been yet, you should definitely go to Rumi's Kitchen. It's one of my favorite restaurants. Welcome, Ali. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we have Marjan Keypour Greenblatt, is a human rights activist and advocate for women and minorities in Iran. She's the founder and director of the Alliance of Rights of All Minorities, an international network of activists which promotes equal rights for all citizens in Iran, and Stop Femicide Iran, an advocacy campaign which monitors and documents acts of femicide and memorializes these victims. Marjan is also the co-chair of the Anti-Defamation League's ADL Task Force on Middle East Minorities and on the advisory board of the Atlantic Council's Iran Strategy Project and New Union for Democracy in Iran. Welcome, Marjan. Thank you. And she's also a musician. But these are all the things that is on their bio. Now I'd like each of them to tell us a little more about their personal stories and their journey from Iran to here as an introduction to yourselves.
Oh, well, you can start with me. Oh boy. Well, my story is kind of the opposite story. I was born in Los Angeles, and my mom was an Iranian immigrant. My dad was from California by way of Wyoming, European nut, one could call him such. They divorced when I was 5, and just years later, my mom would marry a fellow Iranian. And just as I was turning 13 in 1999, they decided we should move to Iran. So I did the opposites of everybody else. Everyone's trying to leave Iran. I'm actually going to Iran. And I have to say it was the biggest shock of my life, probably the most consequential experience of my life too. And it was very hard. I was a girl that had crushes in school that wore t-shirts and shorts, and all of a sudden I was expected to wear mandatory hijab. I was as tall as I am now, which is 5'10", so I stood out always. And I didn't understand Iran. I didn't understand why state media, they were burning American flags. It was a very different time. And to be completely honest, I hated Iran at the time because nobody spent time explaining it to me why the US and Iran didn't have relations. And it was a tough time. A lot of personal stuff happened, a lot of family drama, but I was a curious child and I had a lot of questions, and those questions were always being answered. Iranians were always willing to answer them. And before long, I fell in love with Iran. I fell in love with the people, the culture, the history, and I was proud to be of that fabric. And the reason I'm here talking to you all is because 9/11 happened when I was in Iran. I remember I actually happened to be at a home of a Jewish Iranian family, one of the few families left in the country, watching it on our illegal satellite dish, what's happening in America. And it really moved me. And I was in Iran when the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq happened. And at the time, there was a time in Iran where Iranians thought Iran was going to be the third country. And some actually were hoping for that because they disliked their regime so much. And so I got very much interested in US foreign policy, and eventually returned to the United States to go to college, to go to UCLA. And by the time I graduated, I became a Middle East analyst, and I moved to Cairo for the Arab Spring. And I'll just make it very, very short and brief, but it is the reason I'm here now is because of that lived experience that made me who I am, talking to you and becoming an Iran analyst now. So.
Thank you, Marjan. Sorry, thank you, Holly.
I think she has her answer.
We can't hear.
Can you speak a little louder then?
So you have to go again?
I can go again?
Louder,
Oh
so she can hear.
boy. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? Oh, I wish somebody had told me sooner. Oh, how about we give the mic to someone else and we can go back to it? Just like, yeah.
Yes. So just a quick summary, which we'll come back to, I'm sure, at different points in the conversation, is that Holly moved back to Iran and then found herself first disliking and then falling in love with Iran and her Iranian identity. And the defining moment was during the 9/11, because she was in Iran when that happened. And so that defined her course of life, because now she's in Iran and US policy. So that's sort of a quick summary, but we'll come back as we go through the questions. Sorry.
All right. I'm going to try to speak up so everyone can hear me. Hopefully I'm not speaking too loud. I moved to the United States in 1977. The only thing I knew about the United States was Disneyland. My parents wanted to send me over here to go to school, get a better education. 1979, I believe that's when the revolution happened, the overthrow of the Shah happened. My dad came to that summer. Both my mom and dad came to summer. I was staying with in a boarding house with some families. They came over here that summer, and the revolution happened. And my mom went back to Iran to try to bring money and sell our stuff. That couldn't happen. That was the last time I ever saw my mom. She became exiled. She couldn't leave the country anymore because of my dad. My dad had some friends in politics. In I was going to high school in 1981, 10th grade, high school. My world changed when the revolution happened. Living in Iran, We were a very wealthy family. We had everything from drivers to maids to cooks, everything. When that whole thing happened, I mean, my dad lost everything. So it was a little bit of a shock to me. I started working in restaurants. I dropped out of high school at 10th grade, working this restaurant, working that restaurant. Uh, I got into the wrong crowd of people. I became addicted to drugs. From 1982, 83 to 1995, where I hit bottoms. It was pretty bad. Probably between 1982 to 1995, I had probably about 21, 22 arrests, been in and out of jail. In 1995, my dad had moved to Atlanta, and he said, I don't want to have anything to do with you. I'm going to pretend you're dead, and sort of just someday they're going to come and tell me you're dead. He moved to Atlanta. Somebody got me a ticket to go to Atlanta, but my dad didn't want to have anything to do with me. I came to Atlanta. I went to a shelter. I kicked drugs and alcohol. I started going to AA meetings. I was going to 3 meetings a day, sobered up. Got from one job to another job to another job. Now growing up in Los Angeles, I've always worked in Persian restaurants. And when I went to Atlanta, I went back and worked in some Persian restaurants, but I also worked for some American restaurants as well. But cleaned up my act, got sober. In 2002, I met my fiance, or this girl, this beautiful woman, and a couple of years later, we got married. And I want to make this story short. In 2007, we opened the first Ruby's Kitchen, which was the size of this room. I didn't have that much money. I had about maybe $50,000, $60,000 saving. She was a doctor. We took about $120,000 loan on her credit card. With my saving, we opened the first restaurant. 5 months went by. We ran out of money. Because restaurant is one of the hardest business to open. They said 90% of the restaurants close in their first 5 years. 6 months went by. We ran out of money. She calls me crying, Ali, we have no more money. I have $5,000 and payroll is up at my office. I need that money. She gave me her engagement ring to pawn it to keep the restaurants open. Atlanta, there's this space where we opened our first restaurant, Sandy Spring, is a big Jewish neighborhood. And the word of mouth just got around about how great the food and everything was. When we first opened the restaurant, I couldn't hire the cooks. I had to hire just people off the streets. And I remember on Friday night, I would 86, like 40% of the menu, and I would throw the food in the trash can because the food wasn't good enough to be served. And I remember Marjan would cry, Ali, we have no money. Please don't throw away the food. But I'm like, I can't serve this food. That's not what Persian food is all about. But anyway, right around that time when she gave me the ring to pawn it, right around that time, word of mouth got around. The restaurant started getting busier and busier. 5 years after that, we moved to a location, an 8,000 square feet location. The restaurant was great. Another 3 years after that was 10 years. I wanted to prove to myself. Now, the restaurant became the most popular Persian restaurant in Atlanta, or any restaurant. I think we have 3 restaurants in Atlanta, and all 3 of them are in the top 10 busiest restaurants. And Atlanta is a steak and potato kind of town. Atlanta is not like DC where it's, culture. I mean, we are very cultured, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to say, but it's not the same. 10 years went by. I wanted to prove to myself that wasn't a fluke, that what I did with Rumi's Kitchen wasn't a fluke, and we could do it again. We opened our second restaurant, and it was a hit just as quickly as possible. Became, a couple of years after that, became an open one in Washington, D.C. We opened the location in D.C. 6 months into COVID, and that was one of the hardest stuff. We had already signed the lease, we had built the restaurant, and COVID happened. Things happen in life. You just got to know how to cope with life, and how to deal with it. We adjusted. We had mannequins on every other table. The restaurant, did great. We went back to Atlanta, opened another restaurant. We opened another one in Houston about 4 months ago, which is great. And that's where I am today with you guys.
Thank you so much, Ali. And what you said is so true. You just have to make lemon juice out of, lemonade out of lemons, right?
Yeah.
And that's what you've done. And you're just showing us every day what you can do more with all this stuff. So thank you for sharing. And I think all these stories are like straight up like reflecting like what Michael and Roya are going to go through in like a few hours with us. So thank you so much. And yeah.
Well, I really don't know what I can add after hearing these stories, but my experience is that I was 7 years old when the revolution happened in Iran, and my life completely changed almost overnight. Even though I was a young child, I could see that there is a big commotion and a big change that is taking over the entire country. I remember the nights of the revolution when the protesters would take to the streets, and some of them were armed. I remember, our house was near the radio and television station. And even though we lived on the fourth floor, we could hear the commotion and the anger and all the violence in the street. And the next morning I woke up and there was a bullet that had cracked through the window of my bedroom and landed just inches away from my bed, because it was the kind of violent night that we had experienced. But unlike many other people who left right at the time of the revolution, my family stayed. We are Iranian Jews and we love Iran. We have a history that predates the presence of Islam in Iran, over 2,000 years of history in that country. My family has actually done a genealogical study, some of them hoping that we would be fancy and European from Spain. But as it turns out, we were 2,000-year-old Iranians, dating back to the time of, the Second Temple, and so there we were. We didn't want to leave just because a revolution took place. We wanted to adapt and stay in our country. But things got more and more complicated, and the war happened, and we still stuck through the war. We lived through the war, and believe it or not, around the same time, I met Michael's mother and family. We did not know actually that this was going to be this way. And as Holly told me about this opportunity, and I had to think about it, and really we made the connections later on that actually this is about the family that I know. But we got to know each other in those post-revolution days and in those nights of war and fear when we had to turn our lights off, and if we had singing going on in our house, we had to keep our voices down. We had to make sure that our drapes were closed so that the Revolutionary Guard would not barge into our homes and arrest us. We served alcohol as Jews. We had the so-called privilege of being able to have alcohol. So we were very popular in our neighborhood. And all our neighbors wanted to come and hang out with us, but we also had music in our home, and that was something we enjoyed. But as it turned out, those were, by the way, some of my best, sweetest memories were those secret moments of joy and music and entertainment that we could steal away from the Revolutionary Guards and celebrate together. And also people would bring poetry to our home, and a lot of the poems that they had at the time were anti-revolution, anti-Islamic Republic poems. So by then I was 14 years old, and we would read these poems, and Iranians have a way of fighting repression. We traditionally fight repression through preserving our culture. This is one of the reasons why the Shahnameh, the epic poetry of Iran, is so popular. It is because it is about fighting repression through preservation of our roots and culture. So, and in addition, it's about humor. So some of these poems were funny and vulgar and beyond offensive to the guardians of the revolution. And as it turned out, one of these poems stayed in my textbook. And I went to school the next day, and I was moving from class to class, and the textbook was in my hand, and somehow the paper dropped out of my textbook. I realized what it was, and I just rushed to pick it up, but my dean noticed that I got a little bit flustered about something. And she's like, Khanum Keypour, Miss Keypour, what's going on? What is this? I'm like, oh, nothing. She says, hand it over to me. Let me see, what is this? And so she had caught me just a few weeks before with a picture of me at a party with boys without a hijab. And she had already given me a warning about that. But then, I was really worried that if she saw this horrible poem in my possession, that she would literally send me to jail. And it was not unheard of for young teenage girls, especially, to be thrown in jail, to be raped and then executed. It was not unheard of. So I was unbelievably terrified at that moment. She grabbed the paper out of my hands. She just walked away. It was Thursday, which is the last day of the week in Iran. And I said, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? She said, I'm going to put this in your permanent record, and you're going to see what's going to happen. So basically, this was a warning that my time in Iran had expired and I had to flee the country. And my mom at the time, she literally stood outside of the French embassy overnight, begged them to give me a visa to smuggle me out of the country. And that was pretty much the last few weeks that I had in Iran. Just fast forward, they sent me to Iran, to France, hoping that we would be able to have a life in France, but because of the extreme anti-Semitism in France, we couldn't really stay there. It was in the 80s and beginning of the French, the Front National movement. But we came to Los Angeles, and we will talk more about that.
Yeah, that was. Thank you so much for sharing that story with us. And you kind of touched upon a lot of the things that's, again, going to come into play with, the music. And actually, Roya remembers the Baba Karam song, and there's all that comes, that you will see in the play. And it was a great segue, because now the questions that I'm going to ask all of you is about your life here in the US, and how the transition happened, and the dichotomy of being Iranian and Iranian American. And I myself came to the US when I was 21, and I came again out of choice. No one forced me. I got married and I came here. So despite all that, there is this, transitioning and finding your identity, but holding on to your culture while also assimilating without losing your identity. And I think that's a struggle as an immigrant we all face during our lives. So, there are different stereotypes for different communities in the US. And of course, the Indians the Indians claim we originated chess, but the Persians think it's them, but we'll let that be for today. But what I did for our questions today is I found quotes from different Iranian American as well as French authors and prominent people who've said who've written books about different experiences of being Iranian outside of Iran. And the first person is Feroze Dumas's, from her book called Laughing Without an Accent, Adventures of a Global Citizen. And she says, here those kids are called nerds and geeks and dorks. This may be the only country where people make fun of smart kids. Now that's stupid. I only hope that engineer who built the bridge I drive across, or the nurse who administers our vaccines, or the teacher who teaches my kid was a total nerd. So my question for you guys is, did you feel the pressure to conform to the Iranian American, the Iranians community of expectations of what is achievement, what is success? Like in the South Asian communities, becoming an engineer or a doctor, and I'm like the rebel, right? I'm here as an art administrator. So, or did you feel that when you were populating the American world, you were perceived in a certain way because of who you were and what you represented?
Looking at me. Okay. Well, it's funny you asked that. I was thinking about that. Stereotypically, there's so many Instagram comedians these days that are doing the stereotypical Iranian dad who speaks with an accent. It's like, why are you doing this and getting C? It's A-, it should be A+. And there's a lot of stereotypes about our community, and that you have to do best. And I think even in the Asian American community, we have the tiger mom stereotype. And it really does exist. There is, to an extent, an expectation stereotypically that we be engineers, doctors, or lawyers. When I was a little girl, I did want to be a doctor. I don't know who put that in my head, but I obviously didn't become a doctor. I became an Iran analyst. It's funny, my mom never was like, why don't you go be these things? And I was thinking about that. I'm like, I'm surprised. My mom, yeah, she'd be like, oh, she wants to be a doctor when she grows up. But when I decided to study political science, my mom wasn't like, hey, why do you want to do that? That's not going to make you any money. Why aren't you doing the other opportunities that a lot of our people in our community have? And so I never dealt with that, but the one thing I did deal with a lot was just not feeling like I'm good enough. And I'm going to be completely honest and say I do suffer from imposter syndrome, and I don't know if that's just what it's like to be a woman in this day and age, where you don't feel like you're good enough, or you're still one of the few women in a room talking about politics. I was at a round table just the other week about Iran, and it was about the Iranian people. I was the only Iranian woman in the room out of 20. And I did speak out and say, well, we need to do better and invite more Iranian women here. And so I think it is tough being a member of a community that thrives on success. But I also want to speak for those that, yeah, not everybody in our community is an engineer, a doctor, and a lawyer, and that's completely fine. And those people contribute in their own way. And I don't think we talk enough about that. I'm talking a lot about social media because a lot of my work revolves around open source intelligence, but there's so many memes about the Iranian community. And I remember recently on Instagram, there was a video, and it was this girl talking about, we're Iranian, we drive Mercedes, we wear gold. And
I've seen that.
Yeah, you've seen that. And I remember the comments, one girl was like, I'm not that person. I don't shop at designer stores. I don't drive a Mercedes. And I was like, and it's true. There's so many people in our community that aren't that stereotype. And I think we need to be loud and proud about them as well. So.
Thanks, Holly.
Same question.
Yeah. I mean, maybe
So,
you can talk about
yeah.
the restaurant industry.
Yeah, so with me, I guess my dad just wanted me to be alive, not die, or not end up in some nut house or anything like that. I don't think that being a doctor, I think that was the thing. Even if I had a job at McDonald's, I think he would be happy. Just have a job, do something. But with what Holly said, my Marjan, which is my ex-wife right now, when she came to the United States, her dream was to become an interior designer, and that's what she wanted to study. But her parents like, are you kidding me? We brought you to US to be a nurse. And they made her, forced her to go to a medical, well, she applied for medical school, but then she ended up going to dental school. And she became a dentist for a while. And her parents didn't speak to her for a year because she married me. I was just a cook at a restaurant, but she had met me. But I'm happy to say about maybe about how long ago? It was about maybe a year and 2 years ago. She sold her own practice, and all she does now is interior design. She actually is the head of design in our company. She does all the designs for our restaurants, and that's what she wanted to do. But yeah, it is something that they want you to be this, otherwise you're not good enough or you're not that.
Yeah, and I can attest to the fact that the design elements in the restaurant are gorgeous. So.
So, you know, when we made it to the U.S. and I was in high school, it was unclear what was the expectation. You know, of course, in Iran, we always had to study very hard, and the standards were extremely high. Even after the revolution, the academic standards were very high, but but it was more than just pursuing a career as a doctor or a lawyer or whatever. It was proving to the man that we can be powerful as well, that we can also be successful, that yes, we may look different, but we can compete just as much as everybody else. And I think that it was just this inner drive that we wanted to prove ourselves beyond just getting a degree. It was also the need to make money. And I think that that was the most obvious way to show to the world that we have made it, that we are successful, that we are something and worthwhile. But in the middle of all of these ambitions, I suddenly just really discovered a sense inside of me that I want to be the one who does good for the world. I want to be the one who empowers the disempowered, because I had always lived the life of a minority. Whether I was a Jew in Iran, I was a Jew in France, I was an Iranian in America, I was, the immigrant who had been to another place among other immigrants. And basically, I always felt like this insider outsider. And I felt a sense of disempowerment. So for me, it was the desire to give power back to others. And I thought that the best way to do this was through education. So of course, when I told my parents that I want to become a teacher, they thought that I was a communist. And they were like, why? We live in a capitalist country. Everybody wants to go make money and you want to go be a teacher? I'm like, what's wrong with this? So as it turns out, life took me in a different direction, and I stayed in the nonprofit world, and I looked at the big picture and the systems that keep people disempowered or could add power through working in the civil rights organizations and so forth. But still, I feel like within the Iranian community or Iranian Jewish community, I feel like I cannot fit in a particular box, that I'm maybe some kind of a anomaly, some kind of a rebel, if not a disappointment. I tell you one more thing. I got into Harvard after finishing my studies, and as an undergrad, I got to, and it was a secret. Nobody knew that I was applying to grad school at Harvard, but I did, and then finally got the acceptance letter, and I shared with my family that I got this and I'm going. They said, "You're going to go to Boston? People are going to think that you're, an inappropriate girl, and nobody's going to marry you." So navigating that was a whole different story. How would I look in my community as someone who has lived independently away from her parents and would be considered unmarriageable?
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. There's a lot of that still, even raising South, in families. Like my niece went to study acting, and there were people like, you're sending her to college to study acting? Like, is that even a thing? So, I think those things, and actually reminds me, I think it's John Adams who said this, which someone here might know better than me on that. I'm not very well versed with my American president's thing, but he said something to the effect that the first generation works really hard so that the next and next and next generation can become a poet. Like, there's something to do with the transition.
The father was, my grandparents, the grandparents were soldiers, so that the children can be merchants, so their children can become poets.
Yeah, something to that effect. So I think that's what I see that happening a lot in immigrant communities, where the first one comes with their $500 in their pocket or $9 in their pocket or whatever, and then they arrive, and then they make their life, and it's all about making money, getting to the next level, and arriving, like you were saying about arriving, and what is arriving, what is success, what is what does it look like? And then the next generation gets a little more freedom to be a little more of themselves. And then by the third generation, they're artists, starving artists. No, I'm just kidding. They're not. but it just reminds me of that. And so that so the next quote I have for you guys is by Mas Jobrani. Have any of you watched his Netflix specials and stuff? So if you haven't, he's extremely funny. And he talks a lot about his Iranian identity in his, he's also an actor. So he says, in the play too, like Michael's mom and he have this whole struggle with him becoming a playwright and an actor. And so quote I picked from Maz Jobrani is that my mother was very wary at first. Now she's come around 180 degrees. She's like one of my biggest fans now. Like she'll come over to my house and she'll be like, okay, listen, I need 2 t-shirts from the comedy show and give me 3 DVDs. The neighbors are asking for them. So did you ever experience like the dichotomy between navigating this Iranian life while also being American, like, you know, having this, like, what is it to be inside the house? What is it to be outside the house? And sort of losing a little bit of your Iranianness when you're with your American life, and then losing a little bit of your Americanness in your Iranian life. Like, how do you navigate those things?
So I mean, I shared a lot of what I shared is about this insider-outsider experience. Really, it really shaped my life. And yes, I can totally relate to this comment about Maz Jobrani because, you know, for the entire time when I was at Harvard, my mom was still very worried about me, very upset with me that I had done this, that I'm really, like, you know, ruining the family's reputation by living, you know, away from their house. And it wasn't until she came for my graduation that she recognized that this is really something special. You know, we're immigrants, we're just a few years new to this country, and my daughter has done this. So then she couldn't stop talking about Harvard. And it was completely embarrassing. But it wore off. You know, Iranian parents have really high standards for their children, and they they still, you know, that wore off after some time, and they wanted
The next best.
the next best thing. And, you know, and it turns out that, of course, you know, there are also, as a female in a small minority community within a minority community, another way for your family to recognize your worth is by how you marry and who you marry. And like, first of all, you have to get married. That is a big expectation, and that is a big hope. And then the next thing is, you know, who you marry. I have to say, first of all, that this show is so brave. It is so incredibly brave because I know what it is like to be a minority within a minority within a minority. But what they do is even more layered. It's even more complicated. So it takes a tremendous amount of courage to take that life, to take that story and put it on stage and share it with the world. So, you know, I married, you know, an American man, you know, someone that I happened to find a lot of life dreams in common. And, you know, we saw the world in a similar way. And, you know, maybe his parents thought that he was a communist at the time as well. It turns out that he actually became a businessman. So my family liked that. But, you know, long story short, there is self-actualizing as a female, you know, in my community was really about marriage, about children. But in the outside community among Americans is about your degrees, about the car you drive, is about then the title you have. And I wasn't pursuing titles. I wasn't interested in titles. So I had to just basically work on myself and just think about my passion, my mission, and tune out those external expectations. And it's something that I continue to fight for, but I find it extremely fulfilling.
So actually, for you, I'll tweak the question a little bit. So how you told us about how you elevated the Persian dining experience and stuff, but the restaurant industry in general is extremely hard to, as you were saying, to survive. But how did you like work that dichotomy between cuisine and especially like initially in Atlanta? How was it with navigating the Iranian versus the American like expectations and worlds that you populate?
Some people won't agree with me or something like that. But first, and this is going to be hard, but this is my belief, so I got to share my belief. I don't believe in minority.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up. I grew up here, and I know people. I have a lot of friends. They're like, "How do you not believe in minority with all these people?" I'm like, I have to talk about my experience. I'm going to tell you a quick story, and I think I was 17, 18 years old. Me and 12 of my friends, we robbed this store. We put the clothes on, and we ran to our car. There were a couple of cops, undercover cops, having hot dog. My luck. They get in our car. They chase us on Sunset Boulevard. They pull a gun. They pull us over. We get in the. I mean, of course, we get arrested. We get in the back of the car. They're driving, and they're like, "Yeah, you foreigners, you this, you come to our country. You're gonna do this, you do that." And they're. I'm not saying what they were saying it was prejudice, but they're right. I'm here, and I stole from. And they said, "We're going to take you to Mulholland Drive, and we're going to shoot you guys." Of course, they were trying to scare us. They're going to shoot you guys. We're going to do that. And, of course, they took us to jail. My idiot friend goes, "Officer, Mulholland Drive is the other way." Like an idiot. Fast forward this story to about 40 years ago. This is, God, that was in 1982. We're at 2020, right before COVID. I'm in my car driving in Atlanta, kind of speeding stuff, and I make a U-turn. There's a police officer, undercover police officer, pulls me over. Like it ended up being the chief of police. What are you doing? I'm sorry, officer, I'm late. I was going to work, and I just, had a call. I had to get back to work. Where do you work? Rumi's Kitchen. Oh, that's my favorite restaurant. And he let me go. So what happened between 1982 and that? It's what I did with myself. I think as long as, I hate to say that, man, but I love Morgan Freeman. He says, as long as we talk about minority, then it exists. When we talk about prejudice, racism, then it exists. I'm such a strong believer on that. But to go back to your question about food, even through my whole time when I was homeless, I kind of knew this was just like a mental relapse, and eventually my life is going to get back. But I knew if you take Persian culture, Persian food, and we put it in the right package with the right ambience, with the right deliverance. I took, for instance, a dish called hormesabzi, for those of you who know what it is. Okay, what is the best vegetables I could use? What is the best herb? What is the best cooking method? What is the best ambience? What is the best wine you could match with this? What is that? We put all these packages together, and we're like, if we do that, there's nothing out like that anywhere in the United States, and I've been to a few restaurants outside of Iranian restaurants outside of US. I have never seen anything like that. And I figured if we could do that, we will build a following, and we have an amazing following. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, thank you so much. Holly.
So we have a phrase in Persian. It's dorage. It literally means two vein, and that's how I'm identified as, because I'm half Iranian. And I would say much of my life I played the chameleon. In LA growing up, when I was a little girl, I didn't understand what I was. I remember being in elementary school and being asked my religion. I said, I'm half Christian and half Muslim, and not knowing I had to choose or anything like that. And so I didn't really understand my Iranian identity. I remember Not Without My Daughter coming out in 1991 and having to watch that. Later, I'd be told as an adult that movie terrorized my mother during the divorce with my father, because my father accused my mom of being an Iranian terrorist, and the judge jokingly laughed and said, how many people had she terrorized? So I kind of lived with this sense that, yeah, I'm Iranian. I didn't really understand it in just right after that movie. Funny enough, we went to Iran for the first time. I didn't speak a lick of Persian. I don't think my mom wanted to even teach me Persian, and that's why my name's Holly, I think, too. My name is Holly after the model presenter on The Price is Right. It's not Hale or Hani or anything like that. But I think it was because she lived in America during the 1980s and felt the pressures of the hostage crisis, where Iranians had to hide their identity and call themselves Greek or Italian or anything just to not be Iranian. because of the racism and the Iranophobia that was inherent during the 80s because of the hostage crisis. So I didn't really understand myself, but during that trip, I learned Persian after 3 months, what they call kitchen Persian, which is enough Persian to get by. But of course, as I told you earlier, when I moved to Iran, I fell in love with the country and I became a very proud Iranian. But even though I was proud and I knew who I was, to Iranians inside Iran, I wasn't Iranian. My mannerisms were different. I'll never forget, I smiled at a couple of girls on a bus once, and they looked at me and they said, "You're not Iranian." And then I was like, "Why?" And he's like, "Because you smile." Because Iranian women are much more firm and serious in Iran. And I remember that sticking with me. And so I always felt like the foreigner in Iran, and I accepted that I was an American in Tehran. And I lived there actually not with Iranian citizenship, but actually American citizenship, because children that are born to foreign fathers aren't allowed citizenship in the country. Now, in the past year or so, they had reversed the law only to change it back all over again. So I don't have Iranian citizenship. Now, in the United States, I get treated differently. I'm seen as an Iranian by my community to an extent, and by the people that work in my field. They see me as an Iranian. But even then, I struggle with that identity. I don't look Iranian to some Iranians. They're surprised by my ability to speak Persian. And so we talked about not being good enough earlier. I always feel like I always have to prove myself even to my community that I'm Iranian, because I don't fit in the right box. I don't look that way or speak that way, or my mannerisms are not very Iranian sometimes, or they are too Iranian. Sometimes people think I'm more Iranian than their children that have both Iranian parents. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that it doesn't matter what people think of you and what you are, if you're Iranian enough or American enough, but it's what you feel inside. And so when I talk about being a chameleon, I feel like I could fit into both communities. And I'm very proud of my Iranian identity, but I'm also very proud of my American identity. And I'm fine with not being from here nor there. I'm fine with who I am.
Thank you, Holly. And it's funny when you were talking about your experiences back and forth. I grew up in India. I lived there for 21 years. I live here now. But every time I go back, each time I go back, I feel different. And it's always like, something, that, like you said, they'll be like, "Oh, are you from here?" I'm like, "Yes, I'm speaking the same language. I'm speaking Kannada to you." But they're like, "No, I don't think so." I'm like, "No, I was born here." But I guess that is something, like you said, it has to be from within. So, do you guys have any questions for them? Yes.
A question for you. Actually, it's two questions, each has two parts, but it's fast. First question, part A, did you live in a Jewish neighborhood in Iran? Part B is, were you involved with the Jewish community? And question two is, those who left, how many went to Israel? How many went to Los Angeles, like you, was probably the most common place, and how many went elsewhere?
So I'm just going to repeat it for our online viewers. The question is for Marjan, and the question is, did you live in a Jewish community and in a Jewish neighborhood in Iran? And for the people who left, did they all end up in, where did they end up versus Israel, Los Angeles, or elsewhere?
So since the 60s, there was no real concentration of a Jewish community in one particular area of Iran per se. Iran had become de-ghettoized for the Jews because the Shah was liberating a lot of people, not that we were in bondage before, but basically had created, destigmatized religious differences. And that was the case for the Jews, for the Baha'is, for, some of the untouchable religions were de-ghettoized, and we lived in different places. We lived in Tehran in a North Tehran, which, as my friends know, it was a nice upper middle class area of the country, of the capital. And there were multiple synagogues at the time. Even after the revolution, the Islamic Republic made a very deliberate decision to provide some privileges and so-called freedoms for the remaining Jewish community in order to present itself as a tolerant regime. But in answer to your question about where the Jews went after the revolution, and yes, you would ask yourself, what happened to the 100,000 Jews who were there before the revolution, and why did a good 90,000 of them flee the country, leaving today's Jewish population to a mere 9 to 10,000. By no statistical information can really explain this except for discomfort and persecution. So where did they go? I don't have exact statistics, but there is a large concentration of Jews in Los Angeles, in New York, and other big cities in the U.S. I used to be better with those statistics. I'm sorry, I don't have them. But I would say that maybe 20 to 30% left for Israel, and then some came to the U.S. And then there is also a large concentration across Europe and Australia. So they're not just in between U.S. and Israel. They actually are scattered everywhere.
Thanks, Marjan.
It's more of a comment. I just feel like part of your stories are my current life. So I'm Persian and Italian. And growing up, I was always never Iranian enough for Iranians, even though I spoke and I read, but I was never American enough for the Americans. So I've always been in this intermediate place where it's like, I'm very proud of my culture. I actually went to Rumi's when you guys first opened it, and I remember making a video for your restaurant, and it was with all the mannequins, and I was like, look at this amazing place, and I would take all my friends who were American. I was like, I want to show you my culture. And I used Rumi's as like a consistent place, and that video ended up blowing up. So it was really nice. So it's a nice place to kind of be like, okay, I might not be fully Iranian, but I still live those everyday struggles of my dad's from Esfahan, and he was like, you're going to be a doctor, lawyer, and engineer. And I said, well, I want to be an artist. And he goes, well, you're going to mop the floors of McDonald's then. Like, he's like, you have to become one of these. And I did. And I share that same sentiment of like how you got into Harvard. I got into one of a top hospital. My dad didn't understand. He was very much like, this isn't Hopkins, so it must not be anything. And then he figured out what it was, and he was like, oh no, my daughter works here. She's a great doctor. Blah, blah, blah. So it's so refreshing to hear these things in a way, because I'm currently fighting just like Zan Zendegi Azadi. Like, I'm always going to these protests, and it's put me in a situation now where I can't actually go back. So half my family is able to go back, but I can't anymore. So it's nice to see, like, even though you've experienced this is kind of still going on, but the younger generation is still pushing to make those differences. So it was just nice. I was just listening, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is my everyday.
Thank you for speaking your truth and sharing that with us. I mean, I think a lot of our community, and not to get political here, but we're going to do it just for a second. I think a lot of the community in the diaspora awoke into the protests, the mass mini protests. I don't know if all of you are familiar, but there were mass anti-regime protests prompted by the murder of a 22-year-old Kurdish Iranian girl named Mahsa Jina Amini in September 2022. And the diaspora came out in full force. For decades, the community had been very much involved with their Iranian identity, like very proud, celebrating Nowruz as we're about to do here. They were cooking the food. They were naming their kids with Persian names. They were teaching their kids Persian. But when it came to politics on Iran, a lot of Iranians that more or less stayed away from that. There were conversations at dinner parties or dinner tables, and there were always cohorts of people that would take to the streets and protest every time there was a mass protest movements like the 2009 Green Movement. But this was the first time that we saw the diaspora come out in full force and mirror the needs and the wants of the people in Iran, that they wanted the Islamic Republic gone. And we saw some of the biggest protests every weekend happening in different cities, in Washington, in Tehran or Los Angeles, in Toronto. And in Berlin, we saw about 80 to 100,000 Iranians from across the globe gather and take part in these movements. And so talking about Zan Zandi Azadi, Women Like Freedom, which is inscribed on my shirt, I just want to highlight that, the push for change is not over in Iran. Iranian women, girls, Iranians in general, ethnic and religious minorities are still pushing for change in that country in different ways. Just because you're not seeing mass people in the streets chanting doesn't mean that their fight's over. So I just want to highlight that Iranians are still needing our support and are still fighting for change every day.
Thanks for that. And thank you for sharing. Is there any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Holly, I'd love to hear more about your experience growing up in America and then leaving and starting high school in Iran. And maybe if you have any more detail about what that was like, because that would seem like impossible to me.
Yeah, so as I said earlier, I moved there in 1999, and my obsessions at the time were the Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, and Britney Spears. Britney Spears was my life. And I'll unpack the Britney part momentarily just to show about our commonalities and also just to talk about identity. I'm going to use Britney as an example. But it really was the biggest shock of my life. And as I said, wearing mandatory hijab back then, literally you show a hair out and you were going to get arrested from it. You've seen a little bit of improvement there, but not so much as we saw with Masajina Amini getting murdered for just for nothing from what we understand. She wasn't even violating mandatory hijab from those stories of her parents that have shared in the media at the time. But for me, it was very confusing because it's a really awkward time. When you're 13, you don't really know who you are. You look in the mirror every day and you're like, I don't like the way I even look. And to be thrown into this situation where I in a country I don't understand, it was very confusing. But I also recognized that I had Western privilege in Iran. I went to the international school that was run by the Iranian government. It was called Tehran International School. I wore an Iranian school uniform, a manto and makhne. But I also had pink hair under my makhne. So that's not something normal in Iranian schools. You would get expelled in Iran for having pink hair. But there were some privileges because I went to a school with diplomat children and children of foreign businessmen and whatnot. But because of those privileges, I also got to have a lot of other privileges behind the scenes as well. Privileges that a lot of Iranians only have behind closed doors, which is going to parties. But again, with the possibility that any time the police could show up and arrest people for having this party. And so in those experiences, I secretly had a boyfriend that my mom didn't know about. And I also had my first kiss. And the reason I'm sharing this is that Iranians do lead double lives in the country. They live secret lives. And just talking about Britney Spears for a moment. So I had a cousin that spoke English with me. He's now an English teacher in Iran. And those first few months were very, very hard for me. I used to cry every day into my pillow, and my mom didn't understand it. I remember when we took off from Los Angeles to our flight to London, my face was just glued to the window, bawling. And my mom was kind of annoyed with me, like, why are you acting like this? Like, she couldn't understand the pain of like leaving your life behind in America to move to this like strange country that I didn't understand and I had to cover, and it was repressive. They didn't even have McDonald's. So, I mean, they didn't have movies like that we could watch in theaters openly. Like we had to watch a bootleg. I remember watching Harry Potter on a television, like a computer screen, yay big, and it was bootleg. So it meant that you would hear people coughing, they were getting up, but it was the most magical day for me to have a copy of Harry Potter and watch it just the week it comes out in America, because I was obsessed with reading and I was obsessed with Harry Potter. These books would get me through days when I had nothing else to do. And so going back to the story about my cousin, I just went into tangent something, but my cousin knew I was obsessed with Britney Spears, and her album had just dropped in Iran. And I was so obsessed with her that we only had 3 satellite channels at the time. And I would spend hours looking for Baby One More Time, her video, to come out. And I would try to practice the dance moves. And my aunt was like, who's this strange American niece I have that's like dancing in our house? Like, it was so unusual for them to see this big personality. And my cousin, just to make the story short, for my birthday, had somehow asked someone to bring from abroad, from Dubai or Turkey, an original cassette of Britney Spears' album. And it was a big deal to smuggle this in because you could get in trouble and arrested at the airport. And I remember on my birthday getting this cassette, and it was the happiest moment for me, like something like that. And I spent days listening to this album. I was so worried that the tape was gonna rip. And I'm just going to pivot now to Britney a little bit more and about identity. I think when growing up in the 90s, who was considered beautiful was tall, lanky, blonde, blue-haired women, and now that has changed. But to me, Britney was the most beautiful person. And when she married or started dating this Iranian guy and eventually married him, I felt like my life had done a 180, because I thought it meant that she was going to have children that looked like me, an Iranian father, an American mother. And I was so excited to actually write about this. And unfortunately, she got a divorce recently. But but for me, it was just it felt like such a 180, because for the first time, you're seeing like your whole lives meshed together, at least in my context, now that you know my obsession with Britney as a little girl. I kind of went all over the place with your question, but I hope it answered it.
So coming to that and looking into the future, do you have some tips or directions you want to point our audiences to learn about either like a prominent Iranian American artist or something that's coming up, or like any protest that you're doing that people want to be a part of? I don't know, anything that you think like looking forward, what is it that they should be looking for from the diaspora?
I think that we are about to witness the beginning of a new Iranian cultural renaissance. Tonight we're going to see a little bit of it here with, I don't know how many Emmy Award-winning Iranians do we have, and honestly, I don't think we have too many. But I think this is so special, and I think this is the beginning. I'm seeing Iranian artists, creatives all over, and we are making up for what is not allowed to be created or displayed in Iran. We have created in all of those places you named, Tehran, Toronto, Berlin, everywhere. In all of those places, we have created Irans that we cannot live in under normal circumstances. And as we create these little pockets of Iran in all of these diasporas, we are also creating new culture. And tremendous amount of creativity. Look at all these Iranian celebrities. Look at Naz Jobrani. Look at the celebrity chefs we have. I think this is something to look forward to. I'm seeing also with musicians breaking through in the mainstream. I'm seeing with painters. There is a podcast I listened to as I was driving here. It's called The Nightingale of Iran. It's the story of 3 girls who were born in America, discovering the music of their father and grandfather, who were celebrated Jewish singers in Iran. And the fact that they were Jewish, it didn't matter really to the audience. They were just celebrated and adored. And this new generation, whether they are half breeds like my children, or they are just born in America, there is a significant interest in going back to the roots, going back to the Shahnameh, creating a new culture and celebrating the old. So look for that.
Uh, I guess we could, continue on opening roomies and trying to introduce Persian culture through the Persian food. I mean, if you come to Atlanta, that's where we're mostly popular. I mean, then if you're Persian and you go to a doctor or a doctor's office or an attorney's office at Northside Hospital, and the doctor asks you, well, where are you from? If you say you're Iranian, say, oh, do you like Kash Kabadim, June? Have you been to Rumi's kitchen? Like we cater bar mitzvahs. I mean, we do everything. Like Persian food is a household name in Atlanta. And that's what we want to do all over.
Yeah, thank you.
Just echoing what Marjan said, I mean, I think that our community, the diaspora in the United States is one of the most successful ones, and people that have lived in big cities, like we just mentioned, recognize that. But I think for the first time in 4 decades, we're really brought world attention to who we are as a people, as a community, a worldwide diaspora. And we're here to stay. I mean, we've got Iranian restaurants, we've got playwrights, we've got movies, like the Persian version just came out, highly recommend that. We've got Iranian supermarkets, we've got famous Iranian memoirs like Persepolis, one of my favorites. And I think it's just, what really spoke to me was this past year was that we were being seen for the first time. We were no longer being hidden behind this monolith of the Islamic Republic, that we weren't being identified with bearded men in turbans or women donning black chador. People were saying that, oh, Iranians look and think like us. They have the same needs and wants. And we were being embraced in a different way that we hadn't been for 4 decades. We had been spending the past 4 decades proving ourselves to the world that we're not the government that is holding Iran hostage. And so I think that we are here to stay and get used to it.
So thank you so much for spending your Saturday afternoon, especially on this rainy afternoon, here with us. I want to, and again, we're so grateful that you both traveled to be here. And Holly, thanks for all the help in connecting us to different people in the community. I just want to leave us with the words of Feroze Dumas, again, from the Laughing Without an Accent Adventures of an Iranian American at Home and Abroad. Most immigrants agree that at some point we've become permanent foreigners, belonging neither here nor there. Many times have been written trying to describe this feeling of floating between worlds, but never fully landing. Artists, using every known medium, from words to film to popsicle sticks, have attempted to encapsulate the struggle of trying to hang on to the solid ground of our mother culture and realizing that we are merely in a pond balancing on a lily pad with a big kid about to belly flop writing. If and when we fall into this pond, will we be singularly American or will we hyphenate? Can we hold on to anything, or does our past just end up at the bottom of the pond waiting to be discovered by future generations? And going by what you said, the future generation is discovering it, and we have a lot to look forward to. Thank you all for joining us.